I'm Bldg, so I'm the chair of the 30th anniversary committee event, and I'm also co-chair of WCCW. It could be impossible without all your support and the comfortable advocates, writers, and educators, and US Congress members who contribute for the good cause in order to achieve today's great change.
It's my great honor to welcome everyone attending here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Washington Coalition for Comfort Women issues. First, I'd like to show our gratitude to Congressman Jerry Connolly, who is also my congressman. Since its inception, WCCW has worked tirelessly to educate the world and become a voice for the historical truth of comfort women. More than 200,000 young girls were coerced and abducted by the Japanese military and its associates to battlefields throughout Asia and had to endure shameful sexual abuse. As we look back at the history of WCCW, WCCW could not have been sustained without the selfless volunteers serving as presidents, officers, and in other roles in support of the issue of comfort women. For 30 years, no one ever got paid to carry their conviction to help harmony. Therefore, I'm eternally grateful for our predecessors and for all those volunteers for believing in the mission of WCCW. And sincerely hope that this legacy of WCCW will continue to educate and influence many people with different origins with one conviction, that there shouldn't be any crimes against women and children in conflict or war. Today, we have the greatest opportunity to hear from many scholars who helped to write on the movement in the US on comfort women issues. I hope to refresh my memory by listening to these distinguished panel members, and hope you will do too. Also, the documentary film crews, led by Dr. Zhang Li, worked many sleepless hours to compile interviews and records to create this amazing movie of testimonies. I'm very proud that this film is premiering today to commemorate stories of comfort women and the 30 years of WCCW. Again, thank you for attending and witnessing this monumental 30th anniversary event, and I hope you will continue to support WCCW. Thank you.
안녕하십니까. 오늘 워싱턴 정신대문제 대책위원회 30년 행사를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 저는 의학부 문제 이슈가 역사에 가려있다가 정신대문제 대책위원회 그 단체들이 이슈를 발굴해서 조명하고 역사에 조명을 받게 해서 인권의 이슈를 끌어내고 관심을 환기시키고 해서 많은 성과가 있었고, 그 중심에 정신대문제 대책위원회가 있었습니다. 일전에 혼인 언론사장님이 말씀하시는데 워싱턴에 세 개의 모범적인 단체가 있다. 그 중에 하나를 정신대 대책위원회라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그만큼 활동을 활발히 하시고 계시고, 또 오늘 30주년을 맞이해서 다큐멘터리 필름 촬영하시고 포럼을 개최하시는 것에 대해서 진심으로 축하드립니다. 제가 간단하게 영어로 축사를 하겠습니다. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to be here today as we all celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Washington Coalition for Comfort Women Issues. I send my sincere gratitude to President Benson and Chairman Bldg for putting such great efforts into organizing today's event. Furthermore, I'm delighted to have our good friend, our Congressman, Dana Champion and May, who are waiting here to celebrate this anniversary. And I believe that WCCW's unwavering efforts throughout the last 30 years have played a significant role in garnering attention and raise support and increasing awareness in the US with regard to the issues of military sexual slavery victims. The issue of military sexual slavery victims is a universal human rights issue as well as a women's rights issue. And it calls for immediate resolution. The sexual violence committed during World War II, the so-called comfortment issue, is also committing Russia-Ukraine war also. It's clearly a grave infringement of human rights and affront to the dignity and sanctity of humankind. I sincerely hope and believe that WCCW's efforts will achieve all the desired success and the meaningful events held on this event today, such as publishing books that outline 28 years of comfort women movement. And taking this opportunity, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation and respect to the leadership and all the members of the WCCW for their hard work and commitment to restore human rights and justice to the fore. Thank you very much.
Huge honor for me to be invited to say a few words. And Bldg is one of my heroines. And I just want to tell you all very briefly that I was in Germany recently and I visited Dachau. And I'm sure all of you have heard of Dachau. But I couldn't end the day of visiting Dachau without visiting the White Rose exhibit. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the White Rose. Bldg. But there were students at the University of Munich that were writing leaflets and getting them distributed, calling out the Nazis, calling out the Germans to rise up against the Nazis, documenting the horrific crimes that were occurring against the Jews at the time. And that group isn't very well known, but the reason why I bring this up is that we have to face the harms that humans commit against other humans. Whether it's what happened to Comfort Women, or whether what had happened in Dachau. And we have to face those harms, and we have to address those things, and we have to acknowledge those things that have happened, and we have to educate societies about those things having happened, and not deny that they happened. But we also have to celebrate the fact that there were students at the University of Munich that were against the Nazis and were risking their lives. And we have to recognize the fact that there are Ochasas and Sammy Loris and John Solis and the people that Dennis Halpins and Mindy Coulter, who's been working on this forever, Bonnie O, Young Moku, Margaret Stetz, Anna Bailey, these people that fought this issue with such pushback, with no support, but would not let their voices be silent. That they were speaking out, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they wanted to have these issues addressed. So it's so important that for an event like today, that we not only remember the horrors of what happened, that they never happen again, but we also acknowledge and remember those that we can be inspired to follow as an example that have been working to address this issue. So I'm really glad, very honored to be able to just share that with you, and God bless you all, and I look forward to the program today.
The reason why this issue, the history and confronting of the challenges of what happened and the legacy of this important issue and the problems that we were faced when it comes to comfort women, the only reason why this is continued to talk about here in the halls of Congress and in government is because of you and others that are raising this up. I can tell you that for a fact, as someone who's been working on issues related to the U.S. relationship to Korea, someone who's tried to raise these issues over the last couple of years, I can tell you that it's so easy for folks in this building to get caught up on other issues, just whatever's happening in the news today or yesterday. To be able to focus in is so critical, and what you are doing allows that space for this to happen. Make sure that this history is not forgotten, that justice can still be pursued, and that the clarity of truth is something that is still worth fighting for. So I just wanted to let you know why it's important. It's because as someone who sits in a lot of meetings and goes from a lot of different events, a lot of times people in this building, they don't confront or focus on these issues unless people come together and make them do so. So please just continue to do that. This is such an important moment, not just because of the anniversary, not just because of the challenges that we're facing with only a handful of comfort women who experienced that tragedy left here, but also because we need to make sure that we are holding accountable our nation's leaders to confront these issues. So that's exactly what you're doing. This is more than just a gathering. You are doing the work of trying to make sure that our country focuses in and doesn't just gloss over this. And thank you to the panel here for lending us your voice, lending us your expertise and thoughts about this all. So I'll let you get back to the panel, but I just wanted to express my deep appreciation for all the organizers and for all the people participating. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me here today. 30 years. And as was said, 30 years ago, certainly in the minds of most Americans, there was no awareness of the suffering that was imposed on all too many Korean women during World War II and before. Japan engaged in a brutal occupation of the Korean Peninsula for 50 years before World War II, and used Korea and the Korean people in often brutal and destructive ways. And remembering the suffering of tens of thousands of women who were transplanted from their homes and their families and treated like livestock to serve the Japanese army. Remembering them and their pain and their suffering, and their families who have to live with that legacy of pain and suffering, is to me a very sacred cause. I'm pleased to have been part of the effort to actually have a monument at the Fairfax County Government Center honoring these Korean women who went through this kind of suffering and this kind of travail. And every time somebody goes to the Fairfax County Government Center, they can see that memorial and be reminded of something they were not aware of 30 years ago when we started this. So we've come a long way. We have progress to make with the government of Japan. The first formal apology came from the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2015. But candidly, while he acknowledged it, first government to do so, it was grudging. And it had about it a patronizing tone and attitude. I can remember going to Japan at that time and meeting with some Japanese officials, and I was horrified to hear some of them say to me, "Oh, the Koreans are just too emotional." I thought, well, I'd be pretty emotional too if that happened with him. I think they're entitled to be emotional. And by the way, that's a way of dismissing their concern. So we've got work to do in engaging with the Japanese government in an honest reappraisal of what happened and who's responsible, and what their current responsibility is to try to help the healing process. From the United States point of view, Japan and South Korea are allies. And we don't need big frictions between them. But truth is where healing starts. And acknowledging the truth is part of our responsibility, part of your responsibility, part of the United States government's responsibility, and ultimately, part of the government of Japan's responsibility. So thank you for remembering bad memories. Thank you for reminding our fellow countrymen of this history and honoring those who suffered and pledging that nothing like that is going to happen again. God bless you all for being here.
안녕하십니까. 위안부 이영수입니다. 오늘 정대희 30주년 창립 기념 행사를 국회에서 갖게 되어서 대단히 감사합니다. 그동안 수고하시던 소옥자 대의장님, 하문선 회장님, 이정실 이사장님, 감사합니다. 여러분, 저는 항상 여러분과 같이 있습니다. 여러분이 열심히 해주시는 덕분으로 저는 건강을 지키고 또 여러분과 같이 있는 마음으로 항상 살고 있습니다. 앞으로도 변함없이 이렇게 위안부 문제는 반드시 해결돼야 됩니다. 그래야만 세계가 평화가 옵니다. 꼭 여러분 같이 해주시기를 간절히 바랍니다. 고맙습니다.
30 years of work honoring the legacy of comfort women, and I want to thank you for all you're doing to promote research and education about the awful crimes perpetuated against these women during World War II. And I want to thank the Washington Coalition for Comfort Women for never giving up on addressing this issue. I'm so proud to take part in this anniversary event to help preserve the memory of what happened to the women abused by Japan during World War II, because that is what today's event is about. It's about memory. Thanks to your work, you are ensuring that the horrors faced by these women are not forgotten, and you are reminding Americans and the world of the price that women in particular pay during times of war. This work is so crucial, in large part because Japan still refuses to acknowledge their full responsibility for what happened. By sweeping the Comfort Women program under the rug, the government of Japan is making the trauma of the crime worse, leaving the women to suffer in silence. No apology or amount of money can undo the harm that was done, both physically and emotionally, to these women. And though apologies cannot change the past, they can help us change the future so that such crimes would be considered unimaginable. But continued denials from Japan make that hard to come by. Tragically, many students are unfamiliar with this incident at all, and that is a failure that must be corrected. You cannot prevent something from happening again if you ignore it in the first place. The abuse of these women must be taught, it must be remembered, and it must be ingrained into the mind and soul of every person that women are not spoils of war. Otherwise, we are doomed to repeat this tragedy. There are so few survivors still alive today, but for them, events like this one taking place in the halls of Congress are a way for them to know that they have been seen and heard, and that what happened to them was a crime. We owe this to them. That is why Congress unanimously passed the Comfort Women resolution in 2007, asking that Japanese government to formally acknowledge and apologize for the crimes committed by the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces. As chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, I am so proud that the sponsor of this bill was Congressmember Mike Honda, the previous chair of my caucus. In fact, he sponsored this resolution despite the fact that he himself is Japanese American. And the Japanese government put so much pressure on him not to do it. But he did not give up because he knows that our responsibility is to the victims. And that is why in 2018, I was so pleased to welcome a peace monument, which was a memorial to comfort women and victims of human trafficking, to the US Capitol. This was an effort that I helped to co-lead with some of my colleagues, and it was an incredible event. I'll never forget the heartfelt applause as we pulled the sheet off the statue and revealed it to the crowd. For once, these victims had recognition in the US Capitol, where lawmakers and leaders were able to see it. And it's up to us to ensure as many others as possible are exposed to this truth as well. And that is exactly what this coalition is doing with events like this. Your tireless work means something to women around the world who are similarly suffering the daily indignities that are thrust on them because of their sex. We must stop excusing violence against women as just the cost of war. Instead, we must remember what was done so we can make sure that this will not happen again. So again, I thank you for your incredible work and for inviting me to take part in this event, and I look forward to continuing our work together to honor the legacy of the Comfort Women. Thank you.
Now we are going to move for the award ceremony. Without our present secretary, first WCCW special recognition to Dennis Halpin, Mindy Cutler, Bonnie Orr, Yang Ku, and Maurice Stetch, and Une Lee. And then we have a U.S. President, Volunteer Services Lifetime Achievement Award, Chang-Shin Lee and Ukja So. So would you please come forward?
Mr. Dennis Halpin. I'm going to just read you the award. This is called Certificate of Appreciation. Washington Coalition for Comfort Women Issues proudly present this special recognition on the 30th anniversary to Dennis Halpin for his outstanding contribution to the historical collection and the co-authoring the book Comfort Women, a Movement for Justice and Women's Rights in the United States, awarded on 7th day of February 2023. Thank you for your contribution, Dennis.
Thank you so much.
There's so many books about these comfort women who, endured since 50 years ago. If you just Google it, there's almost every, for example, GW library, there's a lot of GW my students, there's more than 10,000 books written about comfort women history. But there is not even one book about the comfort women redress movement. That's what we do. So I think this is another very important history. It is worthy to write about because eventually every book has. We're not gonna live forever. Already our founding president, the late Dong Lee Han, she passed last year. So this is working to learn and in terms of main aspects. So title of the forum, Comfort Women Redress Movement in Post-Victim Era. There's only 3 comfort women survive right now, only in South Korea. And then they are in their mid-90s. Since the foundation of WCCW in 1992, the redress movement, by the way, the redress means is, as you know, the amend and then the correct. There are so many things was written incorrectly. So this is a movement that we try to amend and then correct when something was written in a wrong way. And especially Washington metropolitan area, this movement has expanded and extending activism to other locations, such as in New York. Can you raise your hand, the New York activists over there? In the Central Park, you raise your hand. All this in New York, they came from the New York activists. And LA and Chicago, Anio came from, she flew last night from Chicago, and Georgia, and Texas. Can you raise your hand, Texas? Organization in Texas, what is the name of it? Forgotten Butterflies. This is the organization, the representation of that organization, San Francisco. So former wartime sex slave called the comfort women, but they didn't mean to comfort anybody, so they didn't want to be called as comfort women. So they prefer to be called as grandmother or halmoni, okay? So we're gonna call them maybe today grandmother. And having suffered not only by their horrendous experience, but by whitewashing and revisionism by the Japanese right wing. WCC invited victims from 1990 to Panmunjom and up to 2019 when we built a statue of her. So for 30 years we invited them. Many of them began to experience deteriorating health and were unable to endure a 50 hours flight from Seoul to the East Coast. So on this 30th anniversary of WCCW, this forum intends to discuss what will be the prospective direction for desirably such a kind of action item, what we're gonna do after all pass, okay? Especially for the next generation. To keep them to proceed the legacies of comfort women when victims are all past. Let me first introduce briefly, because every bio you can find in the program book, in detailed bio of them. They are all wonderful achievement and wonderful. This was the first comfort women resolution to be marked up by our congressional committee in September 2006, and helping also assist Asian Pacific Subcommittee Staff Director Lisa Lipinski in preparations for the first ever hearing convened by Chairman Uni Valera Vega, which is so important, that hearing they invite the 3 comfort women victims as witness in February 2007. He is also co-editor with me for the discipline. Professor Banio, she served 38 years in American higher education as a teaching faculty and administrator at 4 U.S. institutions of higher education, retiring from Georgetown University. She co-convened the first academic conference on comfort women in 1996 at Georgetown and co-edited the first academic book on the subject. Always this first is very important, right? The first. Legacies of comfort women of World War II in 2001 that inspired a lot of the later scholars. Now, Mindy Kohler is the founder and director of Asia Policy Point, a nonprofit research center in Washington, D.C., studying U.S. policy relationship with Japan and Northeast Asia. Her focus is a connection between history and Asian regional security. She writes on the political and policy implication of comfort women and pioneers of the war of Japanese and historical memory in Asia. She advised Congressional Michael Honda in his drafting and defense of 2007 comfort women resolution. So her contribution is enormous in terms of drafting of the House Resolution 121. And she recommended in particular very specific word like unequivocal. It's a very, very important term that she added into the House Resolution. Yang Mo-ku Professor Yamamoto is Associate Professor of Political Science and Associate Director of Peace and War Center at Norwich University. Dr. Ku's research focus lies in the politics of memory and reconciliation, East Asia and Europe, North to South Korean politics, and East Asian security. He co-authored the book Politics in North and South Korea, Political Development, Economy, and Foreign Relations in 2018. And I skipped the rest of it. Margaret Steps, who couldn't come because she has to teach, but she gave me her statement, so maybe I'm going to read it. She's a professor of women's study and professor of humanity at the University of Delaware. And with Bonnie O, she was a co-organizer at Georgetown University, a first international academic conference. And then and co-editor of Legacies of Comfort Women of World War II. She has published over a dozen essays on this subject in journal and edited the collection. So let me explain a little bit of a panel structure and timing. It's far behind of our schedule. Okay, so I have only two questions, and each question this panelist will respond to that within 2 minutes, each person. And then I'm gonna turn my mic on your audience if you have any suggestion or any question, and then we're gonna take the questions. Question number 1. Briefly explain what your role has been in the space of this campaign, and what positive outcomes have you helped to bring about. Starting from Dennis.
WCCW 회장님, 그리고 quý賓 여러분, 오늘 초대해 주셔서 영광이라고 생각하고 감사를 드립니다. I just wanted to say congratulations to WCCW on this 30th anniversary commemoration. I'm well aware of all the work you've been doing for 30 years in raising the consciousness of the Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C. community, the local Korean American community, and federal and local officials about the tragic history of the so-called comfort women. I also would note that you were involved, as I think Congressman Conley mentioned, in the construction of the Comfort Women Memorial Peace Gardens on the grounds of Fairfax County Government Center. And I also was there when you dedicated the Statue of Peace in Annandale, I believe 1918 or 19, maybe 1990, I don't remember. 18?
It's been 3 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it was just before COVID, as I recall. Halini Kim Hak-sun was the first woman who had the courage to step forward and speak about this. This was at a time before the Me Too movement, when sexual victims of crimes of violence in war and other places were not considered the victims, that they were criticized. And she also spoke forward in a shame culture, East Asian shame culture, where she knew she would get some negative feedback. So we should remember her and her courage today. And as we look to the future and educating a future generation, please carry forward your work and make sure that, as Suzanne Schulte said, the crimes of the war in the Pacific are as well remembered as World War II. Thank you.
Not to mention, pay homage to Mrs. Dong Lee Hong, the founder of Washington Coalition for Comfort Women Issues. When she was first founding this, it was in the basement of her McLean Church, and I was with her. I was one of the 6 women when she announced her heartbreaking now, gaining the knowledge of this and establishing this. And she's no longer with us, and we all like to keep her in mind as we go along with today's program. And I am also missing Miss Professor Margaret Stutz, who is written here in the program, but she couldn't attend the meeting. She's one of the most eloquent speakers on issues, general issues on violence against women and comfort women in particular. As I was invited by Dr. Johnson Lee to come here, she said, I know what you did, don't dwell on the past. You have no more than 4 minutes, she said, not 5 minutes. So I cut and cut. And she said, look to the past. You all have what Comfort Woman did in the past on this program, so I won't dwell on it. But I'd like to mention to you that I lived in this country for 67 years. 30 of this 67 years was spent on worrying about doing work on Comfort Woman. That's quite a long time, and I grew old with Comfort Woman issues. I was in 50s when I started being active on this. I am now in my 80s. So, anyway, skipping over all what we did and so forth, and Dr. Lee already mentioned that Professor Stetson and I were the 2 conveners for the very first Comfort Woman conference, when Comfort Woman issues were hardly known, and when we were fundraising within Georgetown, going around all the department chairs and dean's offices, and literally with a brown lunch bag, $10 here, $25 there, and all this to have our first conference. They all told me, this is a kiss of death for you. Subject like can be academic field. And you know how people in academia know what terrible word it is to be called academic activist. You gotta be just, channeling your activities on your field and trying to get tenure and promotion and stay with it. Once you get out of it, you're labeled as not true scholars. But Margaret and I took that risk, and with Comfort Woman, I became an academic activist, whether we were criticized or not. So that's what I like to tell you about it. And then Dr. Johnson Lee said we should look to the future. I am thinking about 2 things. I think nothing is more important that now that most of the Comfort Women are passing and only 3 are supposed to have left.
Question number 2 will be discussed after one round is over.
Okay, education, I have only 2 minutes left. Education, put Comfort Woman issues in academic curriculum. Education, and second is to write about it. Write in journals, academic journals, periodicals, those of us who are interested and know about it. And then the third is have as many meetings as possible. If you are in academia, arouse the students to have their own meetings among students. And then those 3 items will be a wonderful agenda to get this Comfort Woman issues, not forget about it, and keep on going.
My friendship with Dennis Hopkins. He presented to me in 2006 when chairman of the House Foreign International Relations Committee was looking at a resolution to see how he could make it happen. And when I reviewed the legislation, I felt I needed to make a number of changes. 1, I needed to tone it down. 2, I needed to fact check it. And 3, I needed to focus it away from my apologies, from Korea. It was all focused on Korea, and the reality is there were women, girls, and boys from 36 different territories, nations that got swept up in a state-sponsored regulation of sex for not only its army, but its navy, its entire military, and it also provided these conversations to Japanese officials and Japanese businessmen. So it was quite a pervasive, well-regulated system. So my changes managed to reframe the question of what was the comfort women and why it was a concern to Congress, because it was a universal question of sexual violence against women. And that's also in 2006, it was 2005 and 2006, when there were different resolutions in the UN trying to begin to examine this question of rape and violence towards women and the understanding of how women need a voice at the peace table. So the following, at the end of that Congress, I was asked again by Congressman Honda's office to try to rewrite the resolution from the beginning to the end. And I did. And the crucial two elements I put in that bill, and of course a lot of people had input over that, try to change this, try to change this, and a lot of, something that succeeds has many cooks, something like that. But I fought for two things to remain, and that was that we want an unequivocal apology from Japan, and that there should be mention of what efforts the Japanese had tried to do to ameliorate the hurt and pain of the conflict women throughout Asia. And unequivocal means, does the Japanese government go through the legislative, political steps to embed it within the political body? And that has never been done. In fact, what you're looking for is a cabinet decision by the Japanese cabinet. There have been cabinet decisions to say there was no cabinet decision regarding the comfort women. The quasi-apology, the Kono statement, has been discredited by the Abe government, and now they no longer apologize. They feel there's no need for apologies, and they've taken linguistic steps outside. So, and the other interesting thing in the process of doing the Comfort Women Resolution, two things. I put together a team of about 17 scholars from around the world to help with the defense of the resolution. So we vetted words, we vetted policies, and then the other is the Japanese press completely ignored anyone who was involved in the process and never interviewed anyone, including me, about the Comfort Women Resolution. So it was an interesting set of circumstances with a lot of Japanese duplicity.
Unlike many other people in this room, I have not directly participated in the transnational conflict women movement as a civil activist. Rather, I have been conducting research regarding this topic, especially the impact of transnational activism on Japan's government and society's behavioral changes this issue. So that since the mid-2000s, my research has been published as a journal articles and book chapters and opinion articles as well. So right now, nowadays I am working on another book project titled Historical Justice, Reconciliation and Peace, the role of agent in coming to terms with the past in Japan and Germany. So another important and meaningful task I have done is to teach a lot of college students, previously at American University, and currently over the last 11 years at Norwich University in Vermont, which is America's first private military college. So 200 years ago that was established. So it is very important to educate future military leaders of the United States about the importance of conflict women issues. So they need to seriously think of how to prevent this tragic event from happening in current and future conflicts. Thank you.
I'm going to read very briefly kind of summary forms of Margaret Spitz that she sent to me. Her statement: her role has been an educator teaching these as a feminist human rights issues in undergraduate classes while giving lectures and conference papers at universities across the US as well as in Korea, Japan, UK, Spain. She has tried to focus attention especially on the conference system's widespread use of underage girls who were legally unable to consent, which contours the denier's argument that this was voluntary prostitution rather than a war crime involving rape and sex trafficking. She was also the first mentor of WCCW webinar project. And question number 2, we're almost done. In your area or interest, what is your exhortation to the next generation as to what should be focused on and why? Why are you listening to this? If you think of any idea of your own, it's 30 years, we should close the one chapter, okay? So what we can do after the post-victim era, so if you have any suggestion, question, invite us to this, I'm gonna tell Mike on you, okay?
Yeah, well, I think some things that could be done, years ago, there was a suggestion, I think, as mentioned by Congresswoman Chu, the Comfort Woman statue was brought down from New Jersey and displayed in the House. But there was a suggestion there should be a permanent statue in the District of Columbia somewhere, because there's all this federal lands and statues. So that's one thing that could be looked at. I think also, work could be done with local universities that have Korean studies. George Washington University does, George Mason University does, to have like an academic corner or center and chair to collect and store materials, as Dr. O said, publish academic papers, and familiarize university students with the war crimes and the Pacific during World War II, including the comfort women. And it has relevance today for sexual violence and war. If we look at sexual violence by totalitarian regimes, we look at either the Ukraine or North Korea. So that would be something I would suggest. And maybe to fund future generations of scholars, as Dr. O suggested, to do further research and familiarize the broader academic community with the issue of the comfort woman, because I do think, as Suzanne Schulte said in talking about Dachau, I've always found, even from my childhood, there's a far greater understanding of the war crimes that took place in Europe in the Second World War than in the Pacific. Maybe that's because the Asian American community was not as large right after the war as people whose ancestry was in Europe. But there needs to be a co-equal analysis and research on what happened in the Pacific War as opposed to Europe.
You could start very, very young and early, and also promote lots. In my time, when I was in graduate school in the United States at Georgetown and University of Chicago, there was no such thing as women's studies. And if we ever talked about it, it was very frivolous and non-academic and shameful. But now women's studies is a very legitimate field of, academic field. And we shouldn't just teach women's studies. We should include subjects like violence against women and come with it, come for women issues. Another thing is that all the history courses teach about wars, like World War I and World War II. When we talk about World War I on and so forth. There were embedded Khanpo women of Japanese nationality in World War I. Did you know that? Japan sent contingent of Japanese forces to Siberia to help, the war effort. And it's called Siberian Expedition. And there were Meiji, end of Meiji and beginning of Taisho era, and there were embedded sex slaves in the military. So we should explore those things and never get tired of it.
It's important to speak up and continue to speak up, but most important, you need to scrutinize what the Japanese do and what they say, because a lot of it is not really what it seems. For example, in the UN there was a resolution, I believe it was 1825, where the Japanese government, for the casual observer, would believe that the Japanese government supported this resolution to support women and examine the problem of women in conflict. However, it was only agreed to by the Japanese diplomat as representing the Peace Commission of the UN, not the government of the UN. The Kono statement was never given a cabinet decision, and it reads, we're going to study the problem more. The problem was never studied more. You need to call the Japanese out. The so-called agreement in 2015, it is no agreement, there is no signed document, there are two pieces of paper which neither government has went through the official process to embed this diplomatic agreement in the body politic. So the Japanese can say and do whatever they want. You need to call them out. And I can give you example after example on this, and you need to be specific, you need to be detailed, and you need to point it out not just to other scholars or to your friends. You need to go to the State Department, you need to go to your members of Congress and explain that you're not going to take these easily answers anymore. And as another strange background, the head of the White House, unfortunately under the Biden administration, the woman who is this is important, the head of the Asian American Pacific Islander public outreach, I first met her when she was lobbying for the Japanese government against the comfort women.
Briefly speaking, as we know, the transnational conflict women movement has been playing a pretty important role, I think. First one is that so many civil activists and scholars, they play a critical role in informing the international community about these terrible human rights violations. So awakening in the international community, that was a really important role. The second important role this movement has been playing was that to pressure Japanese government and the society to address these important topics. Even though the Japanese government has not been fully addressing this issue, but there must be some limited changes in behavioral changes in Japanese government in addition to this one. So in my previous research, actually I coined two terms. The first one was that the type 1 transnational activism and type 2 transnational activism. So the type 1 activism means that the civil activists, the civil activist groups, they form the transnational kind of networks to pressure Japanese government and just target state government to fully come to terms with their past wrongdoings. So the transnational conflict women movement has been focused on this type 1 activism, but another one is that type 2 activism, which means that the civil activist groups, they try to foster the mutual understandings through the tenacious and long-standing history dialogues and large-scale youth exchange programs that Germany and Poland have done, Germany and France have done. So I think the type 1 activism, which focus on the pressure and just shaming the government, that's really important. So anyhow, the civil society groups and other scholars continue to do that. But on top of that, how we can engage the Japanese leaders and Japanese public more effectively. I think we need to think about those kinds of mechanisms to address those issues as well. Thank you.
I understand that during the World War II, Japan has committed similar crimes they did to Korea, and my question is addressed to WCCW. Are you aware of any organization similar to WCCW in any other countries in Southeast Asia, such as the Philippines or Indonesia or any other countries? And my second question is, if there are any such organizations, are you in touch with them? That's my question.
There are organizations in the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan. There are women's movements throughout Asia. The President Marcos is in Japan right now, and there's a great deal of discontent in the Philippines because everyone knows that he will not bring up the issue of the comfort women. So there's a lot of money involved, and a lot of people have to speak out. I don't know if the WCCW is connected with any of these groups. I have connected with them. Also in Australia, there's activists, but the Japanese are going to every one of these countries and pushing back. They're flooding the internet with disinformation and supposed scholarly articles to combat, to muddy the water of history, which is exactly what the Holocaust deniers do. They want to spread doubt. And my biggest recommendation is cooperation as well as speaking out.
Like we can access it through like human right, women's right, domestic violence, or any kind of historical unjust, all these things, because that's why we're more than happy to collaborate with other organizations, like your organization. So maybe that's the next leadership of WCCW should do. You should ponder and think of it.
It's not a country, Reverend, but within the United States, each city, like for example, Atlanta, New York, Chicago, one trying to establish comfort women statues. So surrounding that issue, there are loosely organized groups of women and some men included to put the statues down on the ground. Let me tell you a Chicago situation. We had spent some $20,000 or $50,000 grassroots, raised fund for this. And in brought the statue 5 years ago. It's still standing in a warehouse because there is such a strong Japan economic influence in all the local economic establishments. We cannot find a friendly land to put down that statue.
And you should also know, the woman ambassador who told Hillary Clinton to call them sex slaves, Melanie Verveer, I'm pronouncing that wrong. She's now head of Georgetown's International Women's Institute. She was very carefully brought out by the Japanese to advise the Japanese government on their G20 women's meeting, which was held at all places in Osaka, and Osaka was rewarded with that conference because it was the Osaka governor who was very anti-comfort women and broke off relations with San Francisco because of their statue. And nobody, to this day, has that sister city relationship been repaired. Nobody has spoke up against it. Nobody has pointed it out. And Melanie Verveer keeps getting money from the Japanese government, and she's now an advisor to the Sasakawa organization, which is really all the foundations in Japan are Sasakawa. You need to point things out. You need to speak up. There is now an ambassador for subnational diplomacy. I did tell her about Osaka and San Francisco. You need to also.
I believe, does Mina Watanabe still has the museum in Tokyo?
Yes.
Yeah, there is a comfort woman
Carefully
museum.
guarded.
And I went in 2016 to Taiwan. They opened a comfort woman museum. I think it was Lee Young-soo, how many came down from Seoul, and President Ma In-jeong, the former president of Taiwan, who was very supportive, was there. I think unfortunately after about 5 years, because of lack of funds, the museum closed. And finally, I'll ask Dr. O about Chicago. I went to the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. It was near where my mother lived, about 5 years ago, and they had put a comfort woman room with paintings in the Holocaust Museum in Chicago. Is that still there?
Yes.
So those efforts at museums, I think, are very important too.
We could provide comparable material to the Korean museum, like a Smithsonian Museum or any other museums. Everybody's like a lack of material. You know, there's some keyword in academic field, which is the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And the other keyword is in academia is decolonization. Decolonization. They want to do something minor, repressed, any trauma, but they don't have the material. Holocaust, maybe Cambodia, what is it called? Yeah, Cambodia. Khmer Rouge, or that kind of material, they don't have comparable material. So that's our maybe duty to provide any institutions and museums.
Ever since 2007, when HR 121 was passed, where from now we are going, we are heading towards, what should we go towards? We have about 3 survivors left in Korea. And what do we do if we want to continue to educate the lesson we learned during the World War II with no power whatsoever in the world politics, and they become victimized. So what is our role, WCCW, as step forward from this moment after 30 years of activity of voicing the comfort woman issues? Do we continue with this legacy, or what would you suggest as a scholar? And it's been all our mind lingering and thought, mind-boggling. And somebody can kindly suggest don't do.
How will this happen to deliver or educate the younger generation without actual presence and voices of survivors? And the representation of them must take on greater significance. Lately, diverse forms of media are stepping up to meet this challenge. Filmmakers, documentaries, writers of fiction, and graphic novels, along with the playwrights, poets, have been reaching new audiences in Asia and the West. Their works circulate in classroom and on college campus. They get immediately to the stories of those who have died and bridge the distance in time, so that the next feminist generation experiences the emotional power of these past gender war crimes, and then understand why leaving them unsolved poses a threat to us all. For the past 30 years, the WCCW has brought this work to public attention and needs more than ever to go on doing so with everyone's help. Who will be the main target of education? Who will be the main target of coalition? We studied as Korean American. This one, House Resolution 121, is really the first successful outcome of grassroots movements by Korean American, the first generation. Look around this room. We are all the first generation, Korean American. And maybe our times is up, right? We have to expand to the maybe next generation, 1 point to second generation, and then non-Korean, which is very important. Do you think how much percentage of the population of Washington metropolitan area know about this issue? Less than 1%, maybe less than 0.1%. So we really hardly strive to educate, but so limited scope, so limited domain. Number two, what would be the relevant media to transmit the history? Relevant media. We kind of bragging of what we did. We organized an exhibition and conferences, write a book. They're gonna read this one. There are several my GW students. We don't even use the paper book anymore, isn't it? Everybody read up to their laptop or all the information they got is like YouTube, TikTok, Vimeo, Netflix, what kind of is media dominated world. So we have to really change that. What kind of media that we are going to use? That's the second question. I'm just posing a question. I don't have any answer for that.
Type 1 translational activism pressuring Japanese government and Japanese society through the information sharing and persuasion and even pressure. I think that has been really important dynamics, and it has been creating very meaningful outcomes. So on top of that, I think in my personal experience while visiting Tokyo and other areas of Japan, when I met with some Japanese scholars and activists and even journalists, I was so surprised to hear that they are even more passionate about addressing these topics. So I was so surprised and impressed by them. But the problem is that, as we know, so many, like a limited number of people who are seriously thinking about this topic in Japan. So our kind of big thought should go to how we can engage the Japanese society and people more effectively. So just the one practical kind of suggestion I want to make is that technically in the United States, there must be a lot of Japanese civil society groups here, even in the Washington area. So I think as a WCCW, as an important kind of the institution addressing this issue, so WCCW can reach out to the Japanese civil society groups, right? Technically, it is really challenging and difficult to have genuine dialogue of this issue, but without just engaging the people within Japan and even just the Japanese American in this country, I think the more pressure we put, the more gap and historical perception and gap we can have. So I think on top of the pressure in Japanese society, I think how to engage Japan and Japanese people, I think it's a really important moment we can think about.
Okay, we have to open a curriculum and engage into the certain areas. Everybody did. How many disciplines do you think teach about component? What kind of program or discipline? Like a history department, women's study. That's all you can think of it. Believe it or not, more than 20 disciplines teaching about component. I'm teaching as an art history and teaching component. I created a new course titled Historical Trauma and Healing Through Arts. There's my students over there. And then 1 week I dedicated about the component. The problem is, all these scholars is just a dot, dot, dot. They don't connect each other. Everybody's just doing what they're doing. So Shimin and we were talking about that we have to create a component conference, component studies whatsoever, annually, city by city, and then where all the scholars, all the artists, we have a beautiful artist today, who work in the film, and all the scholars and activists, and then the artists, filmmaker just get together, and then they kind of, share their thoughts, communicate, and create a more better world. I have to finish, so I'm gonna finish. I'm sorry, there's a bunch of things to say by then. I know there's a lot of things to say, but buy the book and read the book. And I'm gonna finish by citing the famous Marian Hirsch's post-memory. Maybe none of this in this room, nobody didn't really experience the word, Korean word anymore. We never be there. What we know is just through kind of indirect information, through books, through film, through story and testimony. So ours is not genuine because it's an indirect information, but we have a whole right to recreate, imaginative investment, projections, and creation. Let me finish by quote of her post-memory. She's a Holocaust scholar. She said, quote, activists to reframe the archival images or past stories so as to grant them multiple afterlives in which they continue to develop and making past injustice and atrocity newly visible in future. Thank you very much.
우리는 하루에도 몇 번씩 위안부 관련 기사를 읽습니다. 그런 탓에 누구나 다 위안부에 대해서는 잘 알고 있다고 생각합니다. 하지만 그분들이 왜 위안부가 됐고 위안부 생활을 했는지, 그리고 그 내밀한 생활에 대해서 속속들이 아는 사람은 별로 없습니다. 저도 사실 이 글을 쓰기 전까지는 그분들의 삶을 잘 몰랐습니다. 어느 날 인터넷을 하다가 한 충격적인 사진을 보게 되었습니다. 한 할머니가 자기의 부끄러운 과거를 고백하고 있는데요. 그 할머니의 몸에는 그 문신이 정말 빼곡히 그림처럼 그렇게 들어있었습니다. 그 문신은 일본군이 남긴 문신인데요. 그 할머니는 자신의 부끄러운 과거를 고백하면서 위안부에 대해 진실을 알아달라고 저희들에게 호소하고 있었습니다. 저는 그래서 그분들의 삶을 들여다보고 싶었습니다. 그분들이 왜 그러한 삶을 살게 되었는지, 그분들의 삶은 어떠했는지 궁금했습니다. 그래서 위안부 할머니들이 남긴 증언집을 구해서 읽었는데요. 읽는 내내 그 참혹함과 그 실상에 대해서 분노했습니다. 정말 그 내용은 우리가 상상할 수 없을 정도로 잔인하고 참혹하기 그지없었습니다. 저는 그 내용을 보면서 인간이 뭔지, 인간은 어디만큼 잔인해질 수 있는지 다시 한번 생각해보는 계기가 되었습니다. 내 안에 있는 선과 그리고 나는 정말 선한가 그 부분도 생각해 보았는데요. 그렇다면 작가로서 내가 해야 할 일은 무엇인가 뒤돌아보는 계기가 되었습니다. 간혹 역사는 기억하는 사람에 따라서 진실이 뒤바뀌는 경우가 있는데요. 일본은 지금도 그 위안부는 돈을 잘 버는 매춘부라고 호도하고 있습니다. 그래서 저는 그 할머니들의 이야기를 소설로 남기자 그렇게 생각했습니다. 아무도 읽어주는 사람이 없더라도 그 진실을 기록으로 남기는 것, 거기에 의미가 있다고 생각했습니다. 그래서 저는 그 할머니들의 삶을 소설로 쓰기 시작했습니다. 그게 이 소설을 쓰게 된 계기가 되었습니다.
What has been done will be done again, and there is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. 전도서 1장 9절. 해악에 새로운 것이 없다니 아무것도 없도다. What we did so far, rally, press conference, lecturing, academic conference, exhibition, publication, filmmaking, all we did is it sounds like an amazing job. We kind of proud of ourselves maybe, but all of these things were done from the beginning, from the foundation, from the founding president. All these categories were done. So I truly honor and appreciate all of the achievement done by previous leaders, especially in the late Bldg. And then also the special recognition, I just wanted to do it add from the foundation, the person who was here, always, almost every single event, she's like gifted in fundraising. We have to, or at least to try to do something new paradigm. Change can start with a little thing, have a new chairman of WCCW, for example, or WCCW need to review the mission statement to set the new goal, maybe change its name, not to be confused with the organization in Korea. And we don't know how to, what, but we get together and ready to listen to each other with an open mind. The outcome from today's forum should be remembered and considered seriously, along with what we have done so far. My recommendation for the new chapter of WCCW, we need to be more inclusive. I already know this one for the next generation, non-Korean, and expand to the diverse field and disciplines. We should challenge new media to evangelize comfort women issues like a webtoon. This is my research. The most visited place by younger generation is a webtoon. But YouTube, video, animation, TikTok, etc. We need at least one paid staff to be a structured organization. Believe it or not, we don't have any paid staff. Every single event, all the leaders actually donated, with the actual working. It's hard to believe. We need more board members. Let me speak in Korean a little bit. 우리 이사님이 정말 더 필요하고요. 제 영화 오늘 보신 거가 그 프리미어 is unfinished film. I need some animation, and I need to find some animator. I really wanted to put some animations on it to make it animate the film, but I need more money. So I really wanted to have more 이사님 필요하고요. 이사님 아니셔도 도네이션 필요하고 도와주시기 바랍니다.